Hi, it's Randall, and we want to do a quick hot take on what a potential railroad strike could mean to your small business. Now, for the last 3, 4, 5 months, there's been serious negotiation going on with the Railmen's Union to avert a national railroad strike. Lots of different things going on there. Hopefully, this can be avoided. But let's talk about, if it occurs, what you should have been doing up until now, but definitely what you need to do now in order to protect your small business. Now, let me kind of just sum this up quickly. Should the union go on strike, there's a high probability it's going to have an impact on your small business, and it's going to temporarily make the inflation situation worse. What you will need to understand in the process is, what are your alternate channels to supply the goods and services that you need for your business, and how do you pass costs along to your customers in order to make sure that you actually don't go out of business, that you can maintain profitability. So if you recall, when we had the extraordinarily high gas prices 10 or so years ago, and people were passing along fuel surcharges, you might actually have to pass along a logistics surcharge to cover your exposure. At this point, I'm not quite sure if you're going to be able to stock up on inventory as a way to weather the storm. That might be a possibility for you. I'm not sure. But more than likely, you're going to have to just kind of weather the storm. And additionally, you'll probably have to work with some of your key suppliers to see if you can find alternate forms of logistics to rail. So primarily trucking. All right. But let's just go through industry by industry so that you can kind of handicap where you might be impacted. Now, if you look at this chart and you start looking at the various types of materials that are transported by rail in the U.S., let's go through them one by one. Coal being the biggest one. The issue there is that's primarily used in energy. The energy companies typically do pretty well. Coal is usually about 90 days supply of coal on site. So energy companies can probably weather the storm, assuming the strike doesn't last that long, and there's a lot of incentive for the strike to be short. All right. Chemicals. Now, this is going to be a big one. If you use chemicals as your raw material, or some of the products that you buy are heavily reliant on chemicals and raw materials, not quite sure what the typical day's supply is. Typically, you don't want to leave chemicals in storage for a good period of time. So you might weather the storm if the strike is short enough, but there is some potential impact. You're probably not going to do a lot of trucking of chemicals. So this one could be an issue, just FYI. If a lot of the chemicals are moving through pipeline, not so much. But for those moved by rail, that's going to be a significant issue. Metallic ores and metals, probably not going to do a lot of trucking of that. That comes in bulk. But once again, there's typically a decent ample amount of days supply. If the strike is short, you might not be hit that significantly, as well as non-metallic minerals and ores. Grain, the food supply, that one is going to be a pretty significant challenge. You typically don't keep a lot of that around, and you need for that to move. Same as with farm products. Once again, those are things that typically don't sit around, primarily because you got shelf life issues. You can't leave them on the train for an extended period of time. So they tend to move those very quickly, get them out. So we could see some disruption there. Motor vehicles and parts, I would say they've had supply chain issues for a good period of time. So I'm not quite sure exactly what the issue is going to be. Along with vehicles, it's probably, the cost of used cars, the cost of new cars. That is what it is right now. Parts, you might find that some of your parts stores may have some temporary outages until this gets moved. You might start seeing some price increases for fleet repairs and whatnot. But a lot of the parts can actually be moved by truck or by air. So what you may have is just some logistics surcharges that you need to be aware of. So just FYI, that's what's going on there. Petroleum and petroleum products. the issue that you're going to come across in that case, once again, is whether or not you have a raw material that's been moved. And a lot of your suppliers should be giving you some indicators, giving you some flags right now around what they are anticipating and what that's going to mean. If you are a little higher, if you are not as close to the actual production of these things, then you might want to start asking some of the people you purchase from what's their forecast. If you start buying from like a wholesaler like a Sam's, a Costco, if you're buying from them, if you're buying from a CDW, if you're buying from whomever, you can find out from their supply chain organizations what are they expecting so that you can plan your business accordingly. Forest products. This one's going to be a little tricky. Obviously, for any paper-based product or any wood-based product, lumber, these kinds of things, that could potentially be a problem. There's trucking, short-haul trucking makes a lot of sense for that. Long-haul trucking, that's going to be a challenge for that one. Now, this other category, as you can see, it doesn't make up a lot of volume compared to the other categories, but it probably will impact a lot of you product suppliers, whether it's consumer products or those kinds of things. Material comes off the boats from China or any other place in the U.S. They get loaded on the rail. It's moved across into the retail sector. So if you are selling consumer products or if you're in the retail sector, a lot of these materials can be moved by truck, but you're talking about getting them into the interior of the country, and rail has often been the most cost-effective way of doing that. So if you have to truck that, that's going to be tricky. And if you've got to bring big ships into the interior, coming up the Mississippi is going to be a challenge with the drought condition. And then, of course, coming over into Chicago, that's obviously a bit tricky, obviously. It's like, how do you get upriver at Niagara Falls? So you don't. That's the answer. So that gets to be a little tricky. So the question then becomes, how far interior can you come with the ship? And then what is the trucking capacity? All of that to say that products for Black Friday, products for Christmas and whatnot in the retail sector could be affected if you can't get this in via air or if you can't get this in via trucking. So as you start thinking through your supply chain, here's an idea for you to begin to handicap how you might be impacted, some of the things you can do, increasing your inventory if possible at this point. Understanding where your potential cost increases might come in. You might get hit with surcharges coming in from your providers. Thirdly, how might you start positioning your customers for these temporary costs that you might legitimately incur due to a strike? And how do you maintain your margins? So that's my quick take. Let me know what you think. Thanks.